Unless you're kind of new to Winston-Salem or new to Piedmont, you probably know him well already. And we have a profound appreciation for this man at so many different levels. The fact that he's an alumnus of Piedmont and his family is so connected here, kids come to Piedmont and so forth, we appreciate that. The fact that he's been so greatly used of God in leadership and ministry, especially as a lead pastor at Triad Baptist Church. I was just there a couple Sundays ago, and to see that ministry growing and the impact that they're having and people who are being reached for Christ and the growth and the worldwide influence is phenomenal. And also, we get to have, we're allowed by rule to have one faculty or staff member serve on our board of trustees, and this guy gets that position over and over and over again because we're so glad to have him and his wisdom on our leadership and in our governance as a school as well. I have said several times when introducing Rob Decker that he's one of my favorite preachers. I love to hear him preach, and I usually say it's because he has this way of always appealing to my mind, will, and intellect. He's going to make me think. I'm going to find something in a text that is going to make me think. He's probably going to make me feel something before the service is over, which I think is good because I often need a little push like that to get me moving, and that's going to cause him to touch my will. I'm thinking by the end of the day, unless he does something very uncharacteristic, that by the end of this day, I'm going to feel like I need to do something in my life that moves me toward God or in his service. And so I love Rob Decker, so appreciate him. Thank you, sir, for preaching for us. Let's welcome Rob Decker to chapel.
Thanks. All right, I appreciate that. Thanks for the introduction. Take your Bibles, if you will, to Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6. I just recently finished a series in Galatians. We went verse by verse through the book of Galatians. Phenomenal book to just really center my heart and really understand my walk with the Lord. And so I kind of have a proclivity toward that right now. And so I want to share a message that I shared with my church some weeks ago, but it's one that I think is very applicable to your life as well. Galatians chapter 6. Stand with me. I'm going to read verses 1 to 5. 1 to 5. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For every man shall bear his own burden. You may be seated. I meant to bring a New American Standard. I brought my King James, so I feel a little more traditional and solid up here with that, but I memorized most of the verses from the King James. I want to preach on those 5 verses to you today. Galatians chapter 6, 1 to 5. I've entitled this message, The Bone Setter. The Bone Setter. And it is the outworking of what Paul is saying as he develops what it means to walk in the Spirit and have a life that is controlled by the Spirit. As you go through life, God reveals to you both the assets and the liabilities of being you. Everyone in this room, and every day that you live, you have a benefit and you have a burden. And you carry those every day of your life. Matter of fact, maybe a better way to say it is, for every benefit and blessing you have in life, there is a burden. There's a burden that goes with it. You cannot have one without the other. A benefit and a burden. They go together as you understand the Scriptures. You wouldn't need a garage if you didn't have a car. You don't get a paycheck if you don't go to work. And you can't have a child and not have a burden. See, the two go together, benefits and burdens. And every time God gives you something, to whom much is given, much is required. Benefits and burdens are cousins, and they go together in your life and are always matching each other. Now, what I want to say to you today is God can only benefit you to the level of your ability to understand or to carry your burden. If you can't handle the burden, stop praying for the benefit, because they go together. They go together. You can't have one without the other. Now, chapter 6 in Galatians is a very practical chapter. It's going to apply all the truths that have been dealt with in chapters 1 to 5, and it deals with these benefits and burdens that we have in Jesus Christ. But ultimately, in chapter 6, it's now going to explain what it means to walk in the Spirit. Now, sometimes when you hear that, to walk in the Spirit, you get all kinds of ideas. Like sometimes you'll say, well, I'm really struggling right now. And people say, well, you're having your quiet time. Well, no, I'm not really having my quiet time. That misses the whole point of walking in the Spirit. Okay, it's not wrong, right or wrong to have your quiet time. There's a sense where your quiet time is important in your Christian walk. But ultimately, that's not Paul's emphasis when he looks at walking in the Spirit. He's not looking for you to say, well, I've had some kind of sign or wonder in my life, that God's just done something miraculous, so that's how I know I'm in the Spirit. No, Paul puts it in very practical terms, and he says, to walk in the Spirit is much more evident in the way you live out your day-to-day relationships. The way you carry out relationships with people is the best evidence of whether you are walking in the Spirit or not, because you're in the family of God. And so he demonstrates that through chapter 5, and he is now going to make it more practical, and he's going to show how this has to be lived out in relationships to walk in the Spirit. So I've outlined this around 2 points. There are 2 practical evidences of the Spirit-led believer. 2 practical evidences of the Spirit-led believer. Number 1, the Spirit-led believer lifts up the broken. He lifts up the broken. All right, let's notice that. Verse 1, brethren. Why does he say brethren? He's saying we're a church family. We're a family. Brothers, we're a family. All right, and we have to constantly be told that because there's a sense where we lose that idea of what the church is. We're a family. And if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Okay, so Paul is thinking about someone in his church family. And what he's telling us is we need to care for one another in the family because every now and then someone is going to be overtaken in a fault. That phrase there, overtaken in a fault, it means to set a trap. Someone's going to have a trap set for them. They're not intending to make a lifestyle of this sin, but they've got themselves in a situation where they tripped up in a trap. They did not protect or guard their life, and they fell into this trap. They took a wrong step. Now, what would that wrong step be? Probably in the context, I would suggest to you that the context of these wrong steps has to be one of these works of the flesh. So my understanding of this overtaken in a fault would be this list, verses 19 to 21, and we don't know which one it may be. I think he's talking generically about these, but they've got themselves involved in a work of the flesh. Now, to put it in the context of Galatians, they abused their Christian liberty. They stepped over the line, and they said, I'm not going to, I'm free in Christ. I can do what I want. And so they got a little past what Paul was trying to argue in Galatians, and they said, I'm gonna step over the line here. I'm gonna abuse my Christian liberty. And as a result of that, a trap was set for them, and they fell into that. They got in some sensual indulgence, as listed there in verse 19 to 21, the works of the flesh. That's going to happen to people in your church. It's going to happen to your relationships. Someone's going to be overtaken in a fault. It's not someone who's made a lifestyle of it. Paul talks about that in Corinthians, man. If somebody goes to bed with somebody and they continue to go to bed with somebody, don't even eat with them. But this isn't that situation. This is someone who gets caught in a trap, and as they get caught in the trap, then he guides the one who can work with him. He says, first of all, you who are spiritual. Now, what does it mean to be spiritual? Just basically put to Paul's writing, under the influence of the Spirit. And what would that be? How would I know if I'm under the influence of the Spirit? How do I know if I'm walking in the Spirit? Well, one of the best ways is then to go to chapter 5 again and see what the fruits of the Spirit are. These in your life? Love, joy, peace, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. You don't need any rule book if you'll just live by those. Are those in your life? You're walking in the Spirit if they're evident in your life. And so Paul says that's the person who qualifies for being spiritual. So he says if you're spiritual, if you're walking in the Spirit, then he says, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness. You see the word restore there? It's a great word in the Greek. It's a word which means to mend a net. The net gets a hole in it. And if you got a hole in it, the fish get out. And so someone has tripped over, they've fallen into some indulgence, some sin in their life, and you who are spiritual, restore them. Go into their life, move into their life, and mend the net. The other word that is often used for that is the word to mend a bone, a broken bone. A Christian who has fallen into some sin is comparable to someone who's broken a bone in their life. And so he says, ye who are spiritual, restore, set the bone, mend the break, fix the net. There's no doubt about it. They're guilty of wrongdoing, but you who are spiritual need to move into their life and set the bone because you're under the influence of the Spirit. Now, not everybody's supposed to do this. If you're not living your life by the fruit of the Spirit, you're not qualified to do that, and so you're not walking in the Spirit. But if you are spiritual, if you're walking in the fruits of the Spirit, then he says, move into their life. Mend the bone. Mend the break. Now, how do you do it? With the spirit of meekness. Be meek. Be meek. Be gentle. The idea is gentle. If you're going to set somebody's bone, they busted their bone, and maybe the bones, you got to be careful with them because they're going to be very touchy. That's what people are like when they sin. They're touchy. They're filled with shame. They want to blame other people for it. They want to get defensive. They want to get mad. So you got to handle them carefully. And you got to do it like a doctor sets a bone. And that's a very painful thing. I've had that happen to me. It's even worse when you have to watch your children's bones mended. I remember when my boy and I, he broke his leg, and we had to take him to the hospital, and they were trying to decide in the emergency. First, they wanted to know if I beat my kid. That was the first thing they tried to determine, and I said, no, I'm not beating my kid. He was on a go-kart. He rolled over. His leg got onto the wheel, and it broke the leg. He was only 8 years of age. I wish I'd never got that go-kart, but I did. I love the go-kart as much as them. But anyways, we go to the hospital. My wife's somewhere else. We call her. She can't get over there. And the doctor said, we're trying to determine we either want to do surgery or we want to set this bone. He said, we don't have enough staff right now, so if we set the bone, which is I think the direction we're going to go, I'm going to need your help. My soul, are you kidding me? It's my kid. I want to go sit out in the lobby while they're mending the bone. That's what I wanted to do. And he said, no, we're going to need your help on this. He said, all we need you to do is to hold his head and his upper part of his body in place. Well, you got to do that with gentleness because your kid's crying, he's hurting, he's literally screaming in the hospital, and they're pulling that bone apart to reset it. And the excruciating pain. And so that's what he's saying here in this text. By the way, that killed me as a father to watch that. I'd much rather have my own bone set than to watch my child's bone set. But you got to do it with a spirit of meekness. A spirit of meekness. And then what does he say? Considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. You got to be careful. You start working with people in sin. And you start working with people who have been pulled. You can get pulled into the tentacles of seduction into that very same sin. I have a pastor friend in Winston who pastors here. I won't mention his name, but when he first got saved, he was so excited about being saved, he wanted to go back and tell all his buddies. So he went to one of the parties they were at because he was going to tell some of his buddies, and they were all drinking at the party. And he said, here I am starting to witness to him. I'm smelling the alcohol that I used to drink, and the Lord's telling me I don't need that anymore, but it smells so good, and I'm so used to it. I remember all the atmosphere of the party. Next thing you know, within about 2 hours, he's drunk. He got pulled into the very thing that he wanted to pull his friends out of. And so he had to learn, there's just things in my life I cannot move toward and I cannot do. And I have to keep myself from that. That's why some of you have to keep from certain things, other people don't. Some people have to fight certain things in their life, other people don't. And so everybody has their own peculiar besetting sins, if you will, and you got to be careful. Consider yourself, lest you also be tempted and pulled into that. It could have been a sexual sin. It could have been something that was a violation of one of these things. But be careful that you're not pulled into it. So there's his guideline already. You broke the bone. You want to mend it, but be spiritual. All right, number 1, be spiritual. Number 2, be gentle. And number 3, be careful. Be careful. All right, there's the outline just from verse 1 that you could see right there on the Spirit-led believer lifts up the broken. How's he do it? There's the 3 things he does. When I was 12 years old, I was raised in Western Philly, and so we didn't have a lot of, open fields like you've got here. I lived in a row house, and so it was a very crowded community where I grew up, and so it was every man for himself. It was a very rough area, and I lived up in that area, and so we had to be very innovative for how we would play something like, say, King of the Hill. 12 years old, King of the Hill. We got no hills. Okay, it's just pavement and streets and sidewalks everywhere. And so what we did is we took somebody's picnic table out of the backyard and we just brought it out into the front of the street, and we had the picnic table there, and about 5 or 6 of us started playing King of the Hill on the picnic table. And so I remember how exciting that was as a kid, not realizing the danger of it, but I'm standing up there, and I remember one time I pushed this kid off, and there I am, I'm King of the Hill, and I'm standing up there on that street, and we didn't care if any cars came down or not, because I'm King of the Hill. Well, my best buddy, who was my best man in my wedding, he was 12 years old at the time too, he snuck up behind the picnic table, and I didn't see him because I was fighting 2 other kids off, and when he did, he came running at me as hard as he could, and he pushed me forward off the picnic table. I'm on the pavement of the road there, and I went to catch my fall like this, and when I did, I busted my bone right there in my forearm. It didn't come all the way through the skin, but it protruded enough. I knew it was broken. 12 years old, first time I actually broke a bone. I sprained ankles and stuff before, but I broke the bone. I looked down. I kind of was in shock as a kid, and I grabbed my arm like this, and I started running in a circle like a chicken with my head cut off, and I started going like this, and I was just, now let me tell you something. When that happened to me, when I broke that bone, I literally was in such a state, I didn't even know what to do. I was like in shock that it actually happened to me. So I'm running around in circles, and I want to tell you what I didn't need. And the reason I want to tell you that is because I want you to think too, when people in your church break their bones spiritually. Okay? What's the first thing I didn't need? The first thing I didn't need is I didn't need a lecture. All right? I didn't need a lecture. It's too late now. I've been playing on picnic tables in the middle of the street, and I broke a bone. I know it's not a good thing, but my sister comes out of the house, Janelle, and says, "What are you doing that for, you big dummy? Don't you know you could have broken a bone?" I know. Here I am running around in a circle, and my sister is lecturing me about breaking my bone. It's too late. All right? Someone you used to have a good time of fellowship with, and now they've sinned. They don't need a lecture. It's too late. It's done. All right? They've got the lesson in their own heart. You don't have to call them to that. Your friend doesn't need a lecture. All right, the second thing I didn't need is I didn't need to be ignored. I'm running around in a circle. I'm in shock. I don't know what to do. There I am going like this. So my buddy Jeff, who just pushed me off the table, runs into the house where my mom is and says, Mrs. Decker, Robbie fell off the picnic table." Oh, conveniently, he said, "fell off." How about tell my mom, "You pushed me off, you dog"? But he didn't do that. He just came and said, he fell off the picnic table. My mom rushed out. She saw I was running around in a circle. I didn't even know where I lived at the time because I was just so in shock. And he came down. She came down, and they immediately put me in the car, and they rushed me off to Dr. Jacobs. Back then, you didn't go to an emergency room for a broke arm. You went to your one-stop shop doctor. We didn't have orthopedics back then. We didn't have all the science of what you got today. It's unbelievable when a person breaks a bone today and they go to the Greensboro Orthopedic. They get that cast taken off maybe 6 or 7 times over a 3-month period. Man, back when I broke my arm, they put a cast on you. They set it right there in 5 minutes. They put the cast on, and then they say, "Come back in 6 weeks, we'll take it off." So that's exactly what happened. We rushed up to Dr. Jacobs' office because he did everything. If I was sick, whatever was wrong with me, he took care of it. They took the x-ray, saw it was broke, and told me we're going to have to set it. But I want to tell you something. I didn't need to be ignored. I was kind of in shock. And sometimes when people fall into sin, they get disoriented about where they are, what's going on in their life, who they are, and there's all kinds of things that come into that. And there's all things that are involved in that, okay? So I didn't need to be ignored. That's tough. I've had a lot of people leave my church. I've had more people leave my church than have come to my church. That's an amazing thing. And so you got to go around town. You got to see these people that left your church. And I realized God had to give me a gift. I call it the spiritual gift of goodbye. It's the 9th spiritual gift. It is. You have to have the gift of saying goodbye to people that leave your life. You have to let them go without any bad spirit, any hatefulness in you, any wanting to get even, because you never know. You never know. So I'm at the church, and I headed over to Walmart to get something, and there was a member that had left my church just a few months before that and got mad at me. He was a deacon, got mad left, got all his stuff. He even got a dry marker board out of one of the rooms with the magic markers. He started loading up all the stuff he had bought for the church. Started loading up, putting in his car. I'm done. I'm out of here. I never experienced that before, where a guy takes all his stuff back from the church. So I helped him load it. What else are you going to do? So there I am loading his stuff because he's going to leave the church. And I said, well, Ron, is there anything else you want? He said, no, I'm gone. Run into him at Walmart. My first instinct was to totally ignore that guy. Totally ignore him. That's my first instinct. So I go into Walmart, and I go down the back way over by the dresses. And I'm over by the dresses, and I'm slipping back here by the cosmetics, places I never go, and there I am. Finally, I get to where I need to go. I see him go out of Walmart. I get everything I need. I go out of Walmart. He's waiting for me outside of Walmart. Okay, if I have to go around with him, I will. So there he is. I come out of Walmart. Hey, Ron. How you doing? I'm just like you people. Okay, how you doing, buddy? How's it going? You know what he says to me? He says, you still like me? This is 6 months since he left. I said, Ron, I never not liked you. You have to have the ability to say goodbye to someone and have the right spirit. And I wanted to ignore that guy. And he came to me 6 months later at the Walmart in the front. What he was really saying is, do you still like me? What he's really saying is, can we mend the broken bone? And I learned a great lesson from that. And as a result of that, I said, Ron, I never asked you to leave the church. I never wanted you to leave the church. He said, could I come back? I said, yes, you can. And he came back to the church. People told me, don't put him into a deacon position again. He'll burn you. He'll burn you. But I saw something in the guy. 2 years later, I watched him for 2 years. I put him back in as a deacon. People thought I was nuts. You're nuts. No, because there's something about this that people don't need to be ignored in their life. That's what they want. That's what they long for, even when they sin and do things that aren't right. Okay, what's the third thing I didn't need? I did not need to be reported. I did not need to be reported. Isn't it something how when somebody does something, it always comes up in like a prayer request, and you pass it on, and you come in Wednesday night, and Robbie fell off the picnic table. Well, what was he doing up there? I don't need to be reported. I really need to be prayed over, okay? But what happens many times is we just use it as an opportunity to pass on information and gossip, but we don't do nothing. I think before you ever pass on information, you ought to first go to the person and see what you can do to help. Or you ought to at least pray for them first before you tell anyone else, because they don't need to be reported. Somebody came to me one time, it just wasn't too long ago, and they said, I'm burdened about so-and-so. I said, God's laid them on my heart. And then they said to me, the pastor said, will you go see them? Will you go see them? Here's what I said to him. I said, I'd be happy to go see them, but why do you think God laid them on your heart? Is the pastor supposed to go see everybody? See, there's something about this that they need love, but God lays them on your heart to go out to them, to reach out to them, to pursue them. Okay? So there's number 3. I did not need to be reported. Let me go on. Number 4, I'm glad they didn't shoot me. I'm glad they didn't shoot me. You know, they still shoot horses today when they break legs. They still shoot them. Sometimes they take them to a veterinarian, put them to sleep, and kill them that way. But a lot of times those farmers, we have farmers in our church that kill horses when they've broken their leg or get where they're unstable or unable to be fixed. Can you imagine if I'd gone to Dr. Jacobs and said, well, you're done, blam. That's it, it's over. I didn't need that. What did I need? I needed a second chance. I needed a second chance. Isn't that what John Mark needed? Isn't that what Peter needed? Isn't that what Samson needed? And over, the scriptures are clear. Isn't that what David needed? Over and over. They needed a second chance. It doesn't mean they won't have consequences, but they needed a second chance. And so I'm glad they didn't shoot me. And then number 5, I'm glad they didn't amputate my arm. I can imagine if Dr. Jacobs said, well, you know what, you got your right arm, your left arm, you don't need that. We're just going to amputate it. No, I needed a spirit of gentleness to come into my life and say, we're going to reset this. We're going to fix it. And so that is a great way to think through that for your life. You know why? Because people are like nets that get holes in them. and they're trying to use their life for the glory of God, but because they've been overtaken by a fault, the fish are going right out of the net of their life, and they're becoming ineffective. And they're not effective to do the task that they're called to do. And so that's point number one. Let's go on to point number two for the sake of time here. Do I usually quit about 11:30? Is that what time's over? Okay. All right. Spirit-led believer lightens the load of the burden. The Spirit-led believer lightens the load of the burden. What's it say in verse 2? Bear ye one another's burden and so fulfill the law of Christ. I love that. I love that verse. So the word burden there is a word which has a lot of terms and usages throughout the Old and New Testament. It can mean an affliction. It can mean a grief. It can mean a temporal need. It can mean a struggle, a broken heart. It can mean abandonment. It can mean a single parent. And it can mean aging. All those terms are used for that word burden throughout the Scripture. So I'm sure it's broader than that, but the idea is that they're carrying some burden in their life, and the burden is heavy enough that they need someone to help them. He says, then if you do that, you fulfill the law of Christ. And the law of Christ in the book of Galatians, clearly in my opinion, is the law of love, to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the law you must go by in terms of how you treat people. Love your neighbor as you would love yourself. What a beautiful way to say that. And to fulfill the law of Christ. And then verse 3, I'll go through that quickly. If a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Don't think you're too big to not fall into sin. That's what he's saying there. Don't be above stooping to help a brother because they've fallen into sin, but you're not. Don't you be deceived by your own sinful, wicked, self-centered lifestyle. Don't be fooled by that. And then he says in verse 4, but let every man prove his own work, and then shall he rejoice in himself alone and not in another. Let me just get to the brunt of that. Don't spend your life comparing yourself to your neighbor. Well, look what they did, and look how they messed up their life. Don't get puffed up because they somehow are struggling a way that you've not struggled. Just keep your head on, in a sense, with what you're doing here. You're not a superman. You're not a spiritual superman. And so there's going to be a day that you're going to have a burden. And you're going to need somebody to help you. There's going to be a day maybe you're going to be overtaken in a fault. And you're going to hope somebody's there for you. So he says, don't get proud about that and watch that. I could do more with that, but let's just go on. And then he says in verse 5, for every man shall bear his own burden. Now, if you have a New American Standard, it says he shall bear his own load. And it tries to distinguish verse 5 to help you distinguish verse 5 from verse 2. Bear ye one another's burden. And then verse 5, let every man bear his own load, because it seems like it's a contradiction. It seems like it's a contradiction, but really it's not, okay? There's two different words there for burden in the Greek, and it's very easily understood. The first word, let every man bear his own burden, is the word baros in the Greek. And it means a heavy weight or a difficult burden that cannot be lifted by yourself. You need some help. Okay? God makes sure he puts into every one of your lives burdens that you can't lift by yourself. That's the word there in verse 2. So you need someone to come in and say, let me help you bear that burden. All right? But the other word, let every man bear his own load or bear his own burden is a different word. That's why I brought this little backpack today, just so I could illustrate it with you. The word is a word which means a backpack. It's the soldier's backpack in battle. It says, so what he's saying is, every man bear his own backpack. Okay, that helps you understand this context. You've got these backpack burdens that God gives you that nobody's supposed to help you with. And yet you've got these huge boulder burdens that if you got to move this, it's a little difficult to move this on your own. All right? So let there be light. Okay. You didn't know I had that in me. Eh? Okay, so there's the two Greek words, backpack burden and boulder burden. Now, God gives everybody a backpack burden, and nobody's supposed to help you with that. You're leeching on people if you go to them and say, help me with this, when it really is your backpack burden. You're taking advantage of people. And I've seen that in my own life where I've done it. So here's the deal. Don't mix backpack burdens with boulder burdens. But realize you have both. Okay? Don't take a backpack burden and make it a boulder burden. No, I'm just not going to make it. You can't believe my syllabuses. You can't believe all the things I got to do. Now I got to work part-time. You don't got to work part-time, but I got to. And so you got all these burdens that God's given you to bear, and so you're trying to push them off on someone else to bear them. I almost hate to tell you this story, and I may regret it, but I'll tell it to you. I didn't tell it to my church, but I'll tell it to you. When I was here and I was dating a girl, she was getting more serious than I was getting, and I had issues with commitment, you know. Wow, that's scaring me, okay? So I had issues all through my 4 years here with commitment. Do I really want to spend my whole life with one girl, the rest of my life? That terrified me when I was here in college. I don't know about you, but anyways, that was one of my issues. So I was a freshman, and she started dating me, and I dated her, and I liked her, and she was fun. But I could tell she was getting a little more, just getting too intertwined in my life yet. And she said, "You want me to do your laundry?" Well, yes. Yes, I want you to do my laundry. My mom had to teach me the day before I left college. I don't know how to do laundry. And so I did a terrible job. Sometimes my laundry would come out all crusty with whisk all over it, and other times it smelled like, half spaghetti and half whisk. It was terrible. I was a terrible laundry person. So she said, "Well, I'll do your laundry." So I was like, I put it in a laundry basket, took it over to, she was doing my laundry. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I probably shouldn't have done that. I probably shouldn't have. I'm taking advantage of her. Why? I'm taking my backpack burden and I'm putting it on her because I don't do a good job at it, so I'm going to let her do it. But you cannot mix up a backpack burden with a boulder burden. Because then when you go to her a few weeks later and you say, I really like you as a person, but this just isn't working out. And you say at school it's God's will. I don't think God's in this anymore. Okay, so I used all the spiritual terms you're supposed to use, and I said, God's just not in this, And she cried, she got mad. And boy, you know what that's like here if you break up with somebody. You don't just break up with her, you break up with all her girlfriends. I mean, they walk around, they don't look at you. They just walk right like past you. It's unbelievable. And that's what happened. I broke up with her. So I'm coming to chapel just like the chapel here. I'm sitting over there, and one of her friends comes by and says, "She had some of your laundry, and she put it on the back of your car." She just laid it on the back of the hood of the car. I said, "Okay, thanks," because she wouldn't talk to me now. And that's all her friend said and left. So after chapel, just like here, I went outside back here. We were at Griffith Hall at the time. Went out there, and she took all my laundry, and she wrapped my socks around the antenna. She wrapped my underwear around the rearview mirrors. My entire laundry was all over my car and on the ground. I felt like I was in some country music video or something, But this is terrible. It was terrible. And none of her friends were talking to me. It was like one of the worst days of my life. And it was my own fault now as I look back, okay? So if you go outside and you see any laundry on your car, you're in trouble, man. You got a bad day ahead of you. But I did that, and I realized now looking back, I was trying to take a backpack burden, and I was trying to make it a boulder burden. And I took advantage of her. Okay? Now, the same thing. Don't ever mix up a boulder burden with a backpack burden. Some of you have backpack burdens, and some of you have boulder burdens because God will give them to you, and He's never meant for you to carry them alone. Now, some of you guys are so tough, you won't tell people your burdens. You just want to carry them all by yourself. And God's never intended, He will give you burdens that are so heavy for you that He will say, "I've never intended for you to carry that." I'm thinking of men here more because girls tend to open up more and share. These are my burdens, okay? But a guy sometimes, I can handle it. That's mistakes I've made in my marriage. I've taken boulder burdens and I just kind of carried them on my own, and I figured them out on my own. Whereas my wife was saying, "Why don't you share what's going on?" Because I want to fix it before I talk to you. I want to take a boulder burden and I want to fix it before. And what God has done in my life and in my marriage and in my ministry is He's given me things, which is a terrible thing to admit, but it's true. There's things I can't fix. What does a man do when he can't fix things? He just keeps hiding that burden. He just keeps hiding the boulder without talking about it, without thinking it through. Because sometimes it's not about fixing it. It's about sharing the burden with someone. So don't mix up the two. All right? It's 11:26, and I was going to give you the illustration from the favorite guy I have in the Scriptures, Moses. I'll take 4 minutes. I'll do my best. All right? He's been to the burning bush. He's seen the glory of God for 80 years of his life. He's performed miracles, signs, and wonders through the power of God. He withstood the enemies. He opened walls of water. But by the time he gets to, I love Numbers 11. By the time he gets to Numbers 11, The people have complained so much about their situation for the 99th time, and Moses is finally overwhelmed in Numbers 11. That's the whole point of the book of Numbers. Everybody murmurs. Even Moses himself murmurs. And when he got done dealing with the people, here's what he said in Numbers 11. I won't turn there with you, but he says to God, I love private prayers in the scriptures, by the way. They're the most revealing because they most touch my heart. He says to God, he says, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? Why are these people like this? What did I do wrong? He says in verse 12, this is great. He says, am I running a nursery here? Am I running a nursery? He says in verse 14, I'm carrying a burden that is not my own. Now understand this, okay? Moses loves these 2 million people, but he's burdened by them. He's connected to the church, the children of Israel by blood, by culture, and by heritage. But he's got to the point that the people that he loves, he doesn't like. And I have to ask you, have you ever loved someone you don't like? Here he is, a man of faith and power. He's about to break. He's trying to help people who won't help themselves, and they've gotten on his last nerve. I wish there was a pill you could take to make you get along with people. I really do. All the pills we got, you think they could make a pill like that. You know, you see somebody coming, oh, I got to take a pill for her. You know, I got to take some for her. Your mother's coming over, I got to go to CVS. I got to go to CVS, okay? But sometimes people get on your last nerve. I don't care how holy you are. I don't care if you have the Shekinah glory all over you. I don't care if you float while you pray and you go up in a cloud of smoke. I'm telling you, there are some people that can take the air right out of your balloon, all right, and bring you down to your knees. That's just the way it is, and that's the way life is sometimes. And the children of Israel are whining, they're adolescent, and they have a rotten attitude. And Moses thinks to himself, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? What do you do when life doesn't seem fair? What do you do when you're carrying that? In other words, the question I'm answering is, how do you manage your benefit while you live with your burden? Okay? Moses is saying it's no longer fun to be me. It's no longer fun to be me. I've learned this in ministry. There are days you can be really blessed and still be really burdened. All at the same time. And you have to manage that in your life. It's not going to be a days of just blessing and then some burdens and then some. No, they're going to be at the same time. And so what are you going to do? Moses, in his private prayer, he says, I want to die. If it's going to be like this, let me die. Let me die. Wait, Moses, you're the man of God. You part waters. You do all kinds of miracles. But in his private prayer life, he wanted to die. Why? The constant pulling of people. The constant pulling of people who want more and more. Give us fish. We don't want fish now. We want leeks and onions. Give us more. What's up with this manna? What's that all about? Come on, Moses, we're hungry. I'm thirsty. It's cold out here. I want my mama. It just goes on and on. Moses says, God, being me hurts. What do you do when being you hurts? God says, okay, Moses, I'm going to set aside 70 elders, and I'm going to talk to them. And there's differences in translations here from some variants to others, but the King James says, I'm going to take from your spirit, and I'm going to put it on them. Others try to capitalize it and say it's the Spirit of God. I'm going to take the Spirit of God that's on you, and I'm going to put it on them. In other words, what God's saying is, I'm going to teach you how to delegate, and I'm going to give you a responsibility, but I'm going to spread out the responsibility so you can cope with your calling. You need some people that can bear the burden with you, that can deal with your situation. So God's glory moves down into the pain of being Moses. That's beautiful. He moves down into the pain of being Moses. And he takes the spirit that is in Moses and he gives it to the 70. Did you think about that? No matter how you interpret that passage, look at Moses' capacity. He had enough of the Spirit in him that 70 other men could have carried it. Or if he did take from Moses' spirit, that means that much was in Moses that 70 other men could carry what Moses had in one man. That's unbelievable. Moses was a man strong enough that he could be divided against 70 men without God having to do anything new. What is God saying to Moses? Moses, let me show you what's in you. You got enough in you that I can take what's in you and put it into 70 men. Now, I'm going to do that because you need help right now. You are overburdened. You're stressed out. You're not comfortable with your situation. So I'm going to take of that and I'll put it in the 70 men. And I always like to say this. God wouldn't put it on you if he didn't put it in you. And the more he puts on you, the more you've got to discover what's in you. You got what it takes, Moses. You may be stressed, overwhelmed, but I'm going to help you. We're going to delegate some responsibilities have here because you're carrying a heavy burden. That just so speaks to me as a pastor. And it should speak to you that there's got to be some people in your life that carry boulder burdens. Because in the early parts of my ministry, I wanted to carry it all alone. I wanted to look like I had the image of handling it all. I don't got that. And I know you well enough to know you don't got it either. And you've got to have people in your life that can carry some things with you. Now, don't give up some things that you're supposed to carry with your backpack boulders. But when that God gives you some of those boulder burdens, you need some people around you. All right. That was a 45-minute message done in 30 minutes. So here we go. Let's pray. Just with your heads bowed and your eyes closed, I just want to ask you as we come to the close of this service, is there some people right now in your life that you would say, I want to be a net mender. I want to be a bone setter. I want to move into people's lives. And I want to set bones and I want to mend nets. Let me just ask you with your heads bowed and eyes closed. Would you just say, that's what I want to be. I want to be a bone setter here at Piedmont. I want to be a bone setter in my family. I want to be a bone setter in my church. Wherever God's placed you, would you slip up your hand and say, yeah, that's what I want to be. I want to see your hand and I want to pray for you. Okay, I see hands all over the room. That's good. That's good. Let me just pray for you. Father God, in the name of Jesus Christ, help us to go forward, not by might nor by power, but by your Spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. So, Lord, put your Spirit upon them in such a way that they have a sensitivity and a tenderness and a meekness